most trade review shows grade the trades submitted by viewers, but today you are getting the rare opportunity to flip the script and judge my Dynasty trades instead. I've included every single trade worth more than a random future first in each of my real money Dynasty leagues, as well as a few lower value trades for context. So you will get an unadulterated look at how I play the game of Dynasty. I might be a little biased in my own grades, so I'm going to need you all to tell me where my grades are wrong and how I need to fix them. We are going to be going through these trades one league at a time and sequentially for each league. We are also going to look at the trades in two different ways. First off, production/team impact, and secondly, the value. Our first trade, we have me sending away James Cook and a 26 first, my own 26 first, for Devon Achane and a 25 second round pick. This second round pick was the 211 in the 2025 class, and then this 2026 pick is projected to be late for this year. So I would put in who I drafted with this 212 pick. However, I used that pick to initiate a series of trades within that 2025 rookie draft, and things get complicated. But just in terms of value from the picks alone, it's a pick swap from a late 26 first to a late 25 second. In terms of production, Achane did give me a slight boost in production, but nothing crazy. And then in terms of value, I still believe that the Achane side is more valuable than James Cook and a late 26 first. However, it's pretty close in both regards, so I'll give this trade a B. Moving on to trade number 2, I send away Chase Brown and a 2025 fourth for Chris Godwin and a 2026 second round pick. In terms of the production difference in this trade, I was hoping Chris Godwin would come back quicker and be a fantasy producer for this team at the time of the trade. Obviously, that has not happened. He has missed most of the season, and even now, he has not been a significant fantasy producer. Hopefully, Chris Godwin can continue to get healthier and healthier throughout the rest of the season. But in terms of value and in terms of production, I do think that this trade was a negative for my team. So I will give myself a D grade for this trade. I also think that this trade just wasn't a great process because I did think that Chase Brown was going to increase in price throughout the offseason, but I was too eager, too impatient to try and move off of him because he was somebody that I really didn't believe in going into 2025. Next up, we have trade number 3, where I packaged together Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Marvin Mims, Sam Laporta, and Bo Nix to go get Nico Collins, Trey McBride, and CJ Stroud. It was more of a lateral move at the time to move from Bo Nix to CJ Stroud. It was a requirement to get the trade pushed through. I really did not want to make that swap, but if it was the last piece of the puzzle, I was happy to do it in order to push the deal through. Now, in terms of the quarterbacks, Bo Nix, more valuable and more productive than CJ Stroud. However, having Trey McBride is definitely both more valuable and more productive than Marvin Mims and Sam Laporta. And Nico Collins has been more productive than both Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown. And so when I look at this, it's 2 wins, 1 loss, but especially the hypothetical Marvin Mims plus Sam Laporta to get Trey McBride was just a landslide win for both value and production. And so I think that this trade is an A. Moving on to trade number 4, I actually send away the newly acquired Trey McBride and a 2026 fourth round pick to pick up Ladd McConkey and a 26 second. At the time of this trade, my wide receiver core had been Nico Collins, Michael Pittman, Jacoby Myers, and Chris Godwin. I really didn't feel super comfortable, especially with all of the questions surrounding Chris Godwin and Michael Pittman heading into the season. And so even though I was pretty high on Trey McBride this offseason, moving that tight end value into a wide receiver was beneficial for my team. In terms of production, the Trey McBride side has been outproducing Ladd McConkey for sure, especially since this is a 0.5 tight end premium league. And then in terms of value, Trey McBride has increased in value, McConkey has decreased a little bit. And so this is both a slight loss in the value and a slight loss in the production categories. And so for this trade, I'll give it a C just because it did fulfill a very important need on my team, giving me a solid wide receiver 2 that I could count on. And I did get that 2026 second round pick the package in with Vlad McConkey. Trade number 5, I send away Derrick Henry and Jacoby Myers to trade up to Christian McCaffrey and have some other assets thrown in here in Christian Kirk, a 26th fifth, and a 27th third. Really, for this trade, I was trying to get some deal where I was picking up Christian McCaffrey off of this other manager and sending away Henry and Myers. I really wanted to get some sort of return to make up that value difference between Henry and Myers and McCaffrey. I would have much preferred getting a single asset, maybe a 26 or 27 second, or a player that was valued in that range at the time. However, the other manager simply did not have the assets to get that deal done on his roster at that time. And so, really, I was super interested in McCaffrey, and I was just going to take whatever I could get back. In terms of production, this trade has turned out very well. I think that McCaffrey has outproduced both Derrick Henry and Jacoby Myers on the season. Kirk is not somebody who has been startable this year. He's had a couple good games, but most of his games have been under 5 points so far this season. But in terms of production and in terms of value, I think that this trade was a pretty big win. So I will give this trade an A as well. And lastly, for this league, trade number 6, I send away CJ Stroud and a 26 second for Patrick Mahomes. The manager receiving Stroud in the second is actually the owner of that second round pick, and they were in a rebuild. And so it makes sense why the other manager wanted to get their second round pick back, as it would be projected very early, and pick up CJ Stroud. However, I would be more than happy to send any second round pick or even multiple second round picks along with CJ Stroud in order to go up and get Mahomes. So in terms of production and in terms of value, this trade is also graded out as an A. Moving on to league number 2, we're starting off with a trade where I send away Cortland Sutton, T. Higgins, and my 2025 first-round pick, the 111, in order to get Malik Neighbors. I really wanted to use some of my wide receiver depth, especially the veteran depth, in order to go up and get an elite young wide receiver, and I was able to do that in picking up Malik Neighbors. I was very, very happy with this trade at the time. Felt like, although it was a little bit of an overpay, it's something that would benefit my team. However, with Malik Neighbors going down with a season-ending injury very early on in the season, I have gotten almost no production benefit from this trade. And to make matters worse, this 111 pick actually turned out to be Emeka Egbuka. Not necessarily saying that I would have drafted him there if I still had kept this pick. However, it is just unfortunate that one of the biggest rookie risers was picked with this draft pick that I sent away. So, although it definitely was not a production benefit so far this season, and I also believe it is a value loss since it is Egbuka here at this pick. This has aged into a fairly bad trade for my team. However, at the time, it was a slam dunk win of a trade, in my opinion. If I had the opportunity to send a similar trade in any of my leagues, I most likely would do it again and just hope that the rookie that was picked at the 11th spot in the first round wasn't one of the most valuable rookies at the end of the season. Next up, we have trade number 8, where I send away Trey McBride again in order to get some more depth on my roster. I pick up Joe Mixon, DK Metcalf, and Jake Ferguson. I really felt like after the Malik Neighbors trade, I just needed some more assets. I needed some more players that I could plug into my lineup. And so essentially, I see this trade more as trading Trey McBride for Malik Neighbors, and then also all those ancillary assets as well. But isolating this trade for Trey McBride, I think it could have been a production benefit to make this trade if Joe Mixon hadn't missed the majority of the 2025 season thus far, and he looks unlikely to come back to help this fantasy team in the future. In terms of value, I would absolutely prefer the Trey McBride side. However, I do use multiple of these assets in trades later in this show. All that considered, I will give this trade a D grade because it was not beneficial and it was not a value win for my team. Next up, we have trade number 9, where I send away Mike Evans, Joe Mixon, and DK Metcalf, as well as a 2026 third to get Devon Achane and 2 seconds. Although I was worried about depth, having the opportunity to get Achane and draft capital, I just couldn't pass it up. Looking at the production difference for this trade, Mike Evans and Joe Mixon, both players that went down early in the season, and then DK Metcalf being fairly disappointing as a wide receiver, or at least as a fantasy producer at the wide receiver position. So the value and the production lies with the Devon Achane side. So I believe this trade is an A. It definitely had the potential to be a loss if Mike Evans and Joe Mixon were very fantasy productive this season. However, because things worked out how they did, I believe that this trade deserves an A grade. Trade number 10 actually ties in very closely to trade number 9 because I send those same 2 second-round picks in order to trade for Chris Olave. The 2025 second-round pick in this trade was the 208, and the player drafted with it was Kyle Williams, who has not been very productive so far this season. He's still a fun and interesting player on the Patriots team, but he is more of a dart throw, hopeful piece than a real fantasy asset at this time. So the production and the value win lies with my side of the trade, the Chris Olave side. And so I think that trade number 10 is another A graded trade. Trade number 11, I keep talking about how I need depth in this league, and then I keep sending away my depth in trades to go up and get elite assets. And so for trade 11, I'm trying to recoup a little bit more depth, get some veterans who I hope will be guys I can flex in this league. So I send away Mac Hollins and 2 third-round picks in order to get Zach Ertz and Christian Kirk. Kirk really, again, has not been someone I could start. He has not found his way into my lineup in this league, but maybe once so far this season. And even then, I don't think that he was able to put up significant points in that week. And so Kirk really was a 0 for this trade. Zach Ertz has been fairly productive, although the Washington Commanders have dealt with issues, the Jaden Daniels injury. Ertz has been a solid flex play, scoring 9 or 10 points per game, somebody that I could at least throw in and get some reliable production from. However, the same thing could be said for Mac Hollins over the past 6, 7, 8 weeks. He's been a sneaky producer at the wide receiver position. Not anyone that you would want to put in your lineup in any sort of redraft league. However, if you are playing in a deeper format, he is somebody that at this point in the season, I would probably feel pretty comfortable flexing as a wide receiver 5 or 6 on my roster if there are bye weeks or injuries. So I feel like it is a draw in terms of production because Ertz and Hollins have had similar levels of production, especially lately. And then basically I gave up 2 third-round picks for free. So a lower value trade in general, but I will have to give it the D grade because I really just gave up value for no difference in production. And lastly, for this league, we have trade number 12, where I send away Calvin Ridley and Devon Achane in order to get Jackson Smith and Jigba. This trade has definitely been a value win. However, it has been pretty even in terms of production since Devon Achane has been very, very productive this season. So I will give this trade a B because it was a value win, but it is more of a even trade in terms of production. Moving on to league number 3 and trade number 13. Early in the offseason, I thought that this team was going to be a rebuilder, a one-year retool or tank, whatever you want to call it. So I send away Tua Tagovailoa, and I receive a 26 first and a 26 second. With this trade being such a value win, I do think that it deserves an A grade. Trade 14, I send away Lamar Jackson for the package of Kyler Murray, a 26 first, a 26 second, and a 2025 second. That 25 pick was the 203. So the way I saw this trade is that I was sending away Lamar to get Kyler and approximately 2 future first-round picks in value. When you combine the value of the 203 and a future second, I thought that it got me into the right value range. Maybe I was selling a little bit low on Lamar, but these are the kinds of trades that were getting done at the time. And since I was tanking, or at least I thought I was, I wanted to move off of Lamar Jackson since he is such a high value asset. It's so hard for him to increase in value, and there was just no reason for me to have him and hold him through this rebuild. Kyler and Lamar have both dealt with injuries and issues. Lamar has lost a little bit of value, but not much relative to where his value was in the offseason. However, Kyler has lost a significant amount of value. The saving grace for this trade is that the 203 allowed me to pick up Jackson Dart. And so even if we take Kyler completely out of the situation, Jackson Dart and a future first as well as a future second, which are both projected to be mid to early because Lamar has not been on the field and productive so far this season, makes this trade both a production and a value win. Although I did get lucky with this 203 pick panning out so well, I will give this trade the grade of A because I have been including randomness and luck in some of my other trades in terms of the trades that went poorly and their grades. So I will include the randomness and luck in the good grade for this trade. For trade number 15, I send away Rashee Rice and a 25 first-round pick, being the 106 for Puka Nacua. Although I was very high on Rashee Rice, I just couldn't turn down the opportunity to get Puka, especially since I was able to package together two medium value but high risk assets in Rashee Rice and the 106 in order to get a more secure elite asset that I could have more confidence in retaining its value. Unfortunately for this trade, Rashee Rice did exactly what I thought he was going to do when he came back to the field after his suspension, and the 106 was Quinshon Judkins. And so in terms of value, I think that this trade did turn into a little bit of a value loss. However, getting the elite tier 1 dynasty wide receiver in Puka Nacua, I think is still a decent value and is worth this kind of trade even now with Rashee Rice being another top dynasty wide receiver. And Puka has helped this team that I thought was tanking actually turn into a top playoff contender. And so even though it's more of an even value trade, this trade was very beneficial to turning this potential reload into a potential championship team. For trade number 16, I send away two 26 firsts and a 26 second in order to get Justin Jefferson. The price at the time to acquire Jefferson was closer to 3 2026 firsts. However, a specific manager wanted to initiate a rebuild, and luckily I was holding both of his first and second round 2026 picks. And so in order to get those picks back from me, I told him that I would want a pretty high value asset. He had both Justin Jefferson and Brock Bowers on the team and really not much else. And so I told him I would send him his picks back, but I would have to get Justin Jefferson in the deal. And this is what we came up with. I do think that it was good value for the other manager because those picks are both going to be very high. The other 2026 first is projected to be a late 26 first, but just with the package of all those picks together, I do think that the value is a win for the rebuilding side, the side getting the picks, but it's really hard to turn down Justin Jefferson, one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. And so in terms of value for this trade, it has turned out to be a value loss simply because these picks have accrued so much value since last offseason, which is what we would expect. In terms of production, Justin Jefferson has been helpful as a fantasy producer, even though he hasn't hit his usual high fantasy output of 18 to 20 points per season. He's been down closer to 14, 15 points so far this year, but that's still a very startable wide receiver in fantasy. And I was okay sending away this plethora of picks because if I had kept them, they likely would not have been early picks. They would have been mid to late picks because getting those 26 first and second picks back was what let that manager really tear their team down and initiate a rebuild. So with all those things considered, I will give this trade a B grade. And moving on to trade 17, I started to look at this team and think, wow, I might be able to actually push for a championship this year. I had accrued so much draft capital in trades prior that I had a plethora of picks. And if I could just get one or two more players on this roster, I really felt like I could be a very strong contender after making all of these trades. And so I sent away two 26 firsts, neither of which were my own. Both were projected to be late at the time for Devon Achane. And both of those picks right now are mid to late 26 firsts. So in terms of value, I think that this trade was a little bit of an overpay at the time to get Achane on the roster, but it has aged very, very well. And I do think it's a value win at this time. In terms of value and production, I think this trade is a win. And so I will give it an A grade. Next is trade number 18. I send away Woody Marks and Bishal Tootin in order to get Noah Fant and Jacoby Myers. Just like I was saying with this last trade, I felt like I was just a piece or two away from making a championship run with this roster. However, sending away Woody Marks and Bishal Tootin actually hurt the production upside of my roster as Woody Marks took over the starting role in the Houston Texans backfield. And Jacoby Myers has not been very productive so far this season. And so, both in terms of value and in terms of production, it was a loss for this trade. I really do think that I got excited and a little bit ahead of myself in trying to make this team a contender when I should have just held these high upside rookie running backs and hoped that one of them did get some opportunity on their respective teams. Unfortunately, one of them, again, was Woody Marks, who did take over his backfield and become fantasy productive and increase in value. So this trade, I'm going to give it an F grade. Luckily, it was a lower value trade. And in terms of trades to lose, since this one had such low value assets to begin with, I'm not too sad about losing this trade. Next up, we have league number 4. Starting out with trade 19, I send away T. Higgins, the 109, and a 25 third for the 202 Devon Achane, and a 25 third as well. Really, this trade boils down to T. Higgins and Devon Achane with a very small move back in the 2025 rookie draft from the end of the first round to the beginning of the second. Although I didn't end up making the selection at the 202, it is just funny to see that the player selected at the 109 is now worth significantly less than the player selected at the 202. So this trade was a value win, both in terms of the veteran player acquired and in terms of the players acquired with the picks. And acquiring Devon Achane has provided a significant production bump for this team as well. So I will give this trade an A grade as well. Next up is trade number 20, where I send away that 202 pick in Matthew Golden and a 4th round pick in the 2026 draft in order to get Geno Smith and a 2026 second. That 2nd round pick right now is projected to be mid to late. And so really this trade, I re-rolled the 202 pick into a mid to late 2026 2nd round pick and pretty much got a Geno Smith on top for almost free. In terms of production, I only had to use Geno Smith a few times this season on bye weeks for my other quarterbacks as he was my QB3, and Matthew Golden has not been very productive either. In terms of value, Geno Smith being worth a late 2nd round pick, this 2026 pick being mid to late, and then Matthew Golden also having the value of about a maybe mid to late 2nd round pick at this time. I do feel like this was a significant value win, especially for the value of assets that were used in this trade. Kind of feels like it was a 2-for-1 or doubling up my value. And so I will give this trade an A rank as well. And lastly, for this league, trade number 21, I send away David Njoku, Jalen Warren, Demario Douglas, Jaden Daniels, and Jaden Blue in order to get Cortland Sutton, Josh Jacobs, Trey McBride, Brock Purdy, and a 26th third. This is a larger trade, and many people at the time were saying that they thought that I had lost this trade, sending away Jaden Daniels and mostly getting these older veterans back that were significantly less exciting. However, when you really look at the trade, Brock Purdy and Jaden Daniels, even if Jaden Daniels had been more fantasy productive than he was his rookie year, the difference in their production was only expected to be 4 or 5 points, and picking up Cortland Sutton and Josh Jacobs in my flex spots, as well as upgrading David Njoku, who was my tight end 1 at the time, to Trey McBride, increased the fantasy production of this team on a week-to-week basis by 25 to 30 points. And so, although it was a little bit of a loss in value, the production upside by making this trade was too big for me to turn down. Jalen Warren is really the only other asset on the sin side of this deal that has been productive or valuable so far this season. Demario Douglas has had a few games, but he's one of those players where it's hard to put him into your lineup because he does make some big plays and have a couple big games, but he doesn't get the volume necessary to give him a decent floor either. So he is somebody that likely would have never found his way into my starting lineup. Of course, Jaden Daniels and Brock Purdy have both been dealing with injuries this year, and so that's not something that I'll dive too deep into. Mostly in a start 11 league with 12 teams in it, a very deep format, getting Cortland Sutton and Josh Jacobs and a real high-end tight end to put in my tight end spot was just so helpful at increasing my production upside that this trade made me a top contender in the league. So not only did this trade make me a top contender in the league, I was able to do so while still retaining all of my future draft capital. So I have to give trade number 21 an A grade as well. Moving on to league number 5, we have trade number 22, where I send away Calvin Austin and the 2025 201 for Rashid Rice. In this trade, it might sound like a bit of a ripoff, but at the time, this was pretty equal value in terms of trading for Rashid Rice. He was worth a late first in the offseason, dealing with the injury and the suspension. And Calvin Austin was getting some buzz as the wide receiver 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into 2025. And so at the time, this was pretty even value. But of course, I was taking advantage of the value dip of Rashid Rice with the suspension and the injury. In terms of production and value, this trade is absolutely a win. And so I'll have to give this trade an A as well. And moving on to trade number 23, this is the trade from the thumbnail and one of the worst dynasty trades that I have ever made. So I send away Emeka Egbuka, a 27 first and a 27 second in order to get Brian Thomas. Of course, as we know, Brian Thomas has lost a ton of value and has not been productive. And on the other side of the trade, Emeka Egbuka by himself has more value than Brian Thomas, and he has been outproducing him so far this season. And the manager was able to also get 2 future picks in the 27 first and the 27 second. And so, hands down, this trade is both a value and a production loss. I would give this trade an F very, very easily. It has aged very poorly. And to make matters even worse, I almost had a similar deal prepared where I was sending Egbuka and a 27 second round pick to get JSN. And so that trade was also being discussed. The manager was also open to it. I think I would have had to add a little bit more in order to get the JSN trade done. However, at the time, I didn't have any shares of Brian Thomas. I wasn't super high on him this offseason. He was a guy that I was fading in pretty much all formats. But I told myself that I already had so many shares of JSN and I had no shares of Brian Thomas. So in terms of diversification, I probably should get at least 1 share of Brian Thomas because I would be upset if I didn't have any shares and he breaks fantasy football in 2025. Of course, that narrative did not come to pass, and I would have been much better off taking the other deal that I was more tempted to take initially. But I talked myself out of it and traded for Brian Thomas instead. So, worst dynasty trade I have ever made and has aged very, 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 very poorly. For trade number 24, I send away Tucker Kraft 2 third-round picks to get Evan Ingram, Austin Eckler, and Rashid. The 25 thirds were both late picks, and neither of them ended up drafting any consequential players. For this trade, I really felt like I had hammers at several positions on the roster, but I was a little bit shallow. I wanted some more assets to play with, and I was high on Shaheed, I was high on Eckler, and I was high on Evan Ingram. Of course, Tucker Kraft had his breakout season, looked incredible, but went down with the injury. Austin Eckler looked like he was going to have a significant role in the Washington backfield and be a week-to-week flex play, a low-end flex play, but somebody that you could plug in and feel good about him getting volume and production each and every week. Evan Ingram, although he was injured the first few weeks of the season and took a little while to come on, he has been fairly fantasy productive in tight end premium leagues, especially higher tight end premium leagues, as this one is at 1.0 tight end premium, scoring around 12 points per game each and every week because he just gets so many short yardage receptions that he can really take advantage of those higher tight end premiums. And then Rashid Shaheed, somebody who has been fairly fantasy productive this season, but he moves to the Seattle Seahawks at the trade deadline, and his production upside has all but vanished. So in terms of production, I did get more production out of Rashid Shaheed and Evan Ingram, while Shaheed was a New Orleans Saint. And since Tucker Kraft has been down with a season-ending injury for several weeks now, it has been a production benefit. But I also lost quite a bit of value on this trade, getting rid of Tucker Kraft before his breakout. And so I'll give this trade a C. Trade number 25, I send away a 26 second, my own 26 second, to get Daniel Jones and a 27 third. This 26 second round pick is still up in the air because I'm currently fighting for a spot in the playoffs. However, there is a wide range of outcomes. If I lose these next 2 weeks, it could be a fairly early pick. And if I sneak into the playoffs, of course, we would just have to see what happened in the playoffs to determine where that pick lands. But either way, I was overpaying for Daniel Jones because I was very confident that he would be able to beat out Anthony Richardson for the starting spot in Indianapolis. This trade was made long before we had any evidence to that fact. And so I really was projecting, but this trade did turn out very well in the end because Daniel Jones was the starter and has looked very, very good within this Colts offense so far this year. So this is another trade that I will give an A. We will finish up with the last trade in one final league, trade number 26. I didn't include any other trades that were completed within startups that I did this offseason, but the main assets in this trade were already drafted several days before this trade was made. And then these late picks in the startup draft were more throw-ins, but they do have some significance to the trade as well. And so the bulk of this trade was sending Xavier Worthy and my 26 first for Ladd McConkey. And then there was this pick swap in the late rounds. At the time, my wide receiver core in this league out of the startup was Nico Collins, George Pickens, and Xavier Worthy. I didn't feel great about this wide receiver core. If you hadn't noticed already throughout this video, I'm somebody who likes to be very strong at the wide receiver position. However, the wide receivers were just flying off the board in front of me, and so I kind of just had to take the falling values at quarterback and running back positions. The other manager with Ladd McConkey was interested in getting some sort of deal done for Worthy and my 26 first. However, we did agree that some sort of value kickback was warranted in the deal. As the draft was unfolding, there were several players in the 17th and 18th round that I wanted to get my hands on, and I was able to throw back 2 picks later in the draft that I knew was going to be in a range of players that I had next to zero interest in. And so for these 2 picks, with the 17th rounder, I was able to select Austin Eckler, and the 18th round pick, I picked up Daniel Jones. While Austin Eckler, of course, had a season-ending injury, it was a good pickup. He did seem like he was going to have that role in Washington, but the real prize here was the ability to pick up Daniel Jones, of course, and then the picks on the other side of the trade ended up being Malik Washington and LaQuint Allen. I do not have graphics made for those players, and I don't believe I will ever have to make them. Xavier Worthy, of course, has not been productive this far this season, and he has lost significant value. So although Ladd McConkey has also lost a little bit of value, Xavier Worthy has definitely lost more. McConkey has been more fantasy productive, and to top it off, this 26 first is projected to be at least mid to late. So I will give this final trade an A+.